In 1982, a Soviet mother living in a cramped communal apartment in Moscow could look at an empty state-run grocery store, a broken iron, a torn pair of stockings, and a single raw potato, and know exactly how to keep her household running for another month. There was a word for this, Smekalka. It translates roughly to an extreme street-smart ingenuity. It was the unofficial religion of the Soviet working class. For decades, the Soviet Union existed in a permanent state of Defitsit, a chronic, crippling shortage of basic consumer goods. You couldn't just go to the store and buy dish soap or window insulation or a new vacuum cleaner part. If you needed it, you had to invent it. And here's what nobody talks about. When you strip away the politics, the everyday housewives of the Soviet era became absolute engineers of survival. Number 14 on this list sounds like a joke, but saved families from freezing in the dark. Number 7 was actually a masterclass in chemistry. These 20 tricks did not disappear because they were useless. They disappeared because modern convenience culture convinced us that throwing things away is easier than fixing them. Before we start, hit subscribe, because what you are about to learn might change how you look at your own trash can forever. Let us count down the 20 bizarre Soviet household tricks that actually worked. Number 20, washing and hanging. Single-use plastic bags. Today, plastic bags clog our oceans and overflow from our trash cans. In the Soviet Union, a plastic bag with a Western logo, like Marlboro or Adidas, was a genuine status symbol. It cost real money on the black market. When a Soviet housewife got her hands on a plastic bag, she treated it like fine silk. After carrying groceries, the bag was carefully turned inside out, washed with warm soapy water in the kitchen sink, and hung on the clothesline to dry with wooden clothespins. A single plastic bag could be washed and reused for years until the plastic literally disintegrated into dust. It was the ultimate zero-waste practice, born not from environmentalism but from absolute necessity. Number 19. Storing onions in nylon pantyhose. When autumn arrived, families bought root vegetables in massive bulk because the stores would be empty by January. But how do you store 20 pounds of onions in a tiny apartment without them rotting? You use old nylon pantyhose. Housewives dropped an onion down the leg of a ruined stocking, tied a knot, dropped in another onion, tied another knot, until the stocking looked like a lumpy beige sausage. These were hung from the ceiling in the kitchen or out on the freezing balcony. The nylon allowed perfect air circulation, keeping the onions dry and preventing rot while taking up zero floor space. Number 18. Dry mustard powder for dishwashing. Liquid dish soap like Dawn or Fairy did not exist in the standard Soviet kitchen. When a family finished a dinner of greasy fried potatoes or heavy pork stew, the mother reached for a yellow box of dry mustard powder. Sprinkled directly onto a wet rag or a sponge, the mustard powder acted as a natural, highly effective degreaser. It cut through cold animal fat instantly, absorbing the grease and washing away clean, leaving plates squeaky and smelling faintly sharp. Modern eco-friendly brands now try to sell plant-based degreasers for premium prices. Soviet grandmothers were doing it with 10 kopeck mustard powder. Number 17. Newspaper and soap window insulation. Russian winters are brutally, unforgivingly cold, and Soviet apartment blocks featured cheap wooden window frames that warped and let the freezing wind howl right into the living room. Weather-stripping tape did not exist. Instead, housewives took old issues of the Pravda newspaper, cut them into long 2-inch strips, and dipped them into a thick paste made of water and cheap laundry soap. They pressed these wet, soapy strips over every single crack and seam of the window frame. When the soap dried, it hardened like cement, completely sealing the window against the draft. In the spring, warm water dissolved the soap, and the paper peeled right off without damaging the paint. Number 16. The boiling pot iron. When the heating element in a heavy iron burned out, there was no customer service hotline to call, and finding a replacement could take months. Women who needed to send their husbands to the factory or their children to school in crisp uniforms turned to the stove. They took a heavy, flat-bottomed cast iron or aluminum cooking pot, filled it with boiling water, and used the pot itself as an iron. The boiling water heated the metal perfectly, and the sheer weight of the pot pressed the wrinkles out of cotton and linen. It required tremendous arm strength and absolute focus to avoid spilling boiling water on a clean shirt, but it worked flawlessly. Number 15. Boiling condensed milk in the canned Smekalka, or sweetened condensed milk, was one of the few treats occasionally available. But Soviet women wanted caramel for their cakes. So, they took the unopened tin of condensed milk, submerged it completely in a pot of boiling water, and left it to boil for 3 hours. The sugar and milk inside caramelized under pressure, turning into a thick, dark, glorious dulce de leche. But it was a high-stakes game. If the water boiled dry, the tin would explode like a bomb, coating the kitchen ceiling in boiling, sticky caramel. Every Soviet family has a story about the day they had to scrape the ceiling because someone forgot to check the water level. Number 14. Darning socks over a light bulb. When the heel of a woolen sock wore out, you did not throw it away, you fixed it. But to sew a perfect weave over a curved heel, you needed something to hold the fabric tight. The standard Soviet tool for this was a burned-out incandescent light bulb. The glass bulb slid perfectly into the sock, mimicking the shape of a human heel, providing a smooth, hard surface for the needle to glide over. It was a brilliant repurposing of a useless object, turning trash into an essential tailoring tool. Number 13. Wet tea leaves for sweeping carpets. Vacuum cleaners were loud, expensive, and broke constantly. Sweeping a rug with a standard broom just kicked the dust into the air, settling back down 5 minutes later. The solution? Used black tea leaves. When a pot of tea was finished, the damp leaves were saved and scattered wildly across the living room carpet. As the housewife swept the carpet with a stiff broom, the damp tea leaves acted like a magnet, catching and binding all the dust, dirt, and dog hair. It left the carpet perfectly clean and smelling faintly of Earl Grey. Number 12. Sharpening razor blades in a glass disposable razor blades were meant to be used a few times and thrown away. But in the Soviet Union, men made a single blade last for 6 months. When a blade went dull, a man would place it inside a smooth, curved glass tumbler. By pressing his finger against the blade and sliding it rapidly back and forth against the curve of the glass, the friction honed and realigned the microscopic edge of the steel. It was the exact same principle as a barber's leather strop, done inside a vodka glass. Number 11. Pravda. Newspaper. Toilet paper. Here is a reality of the Soviet economy. They launched the first man into space before they managed to mass-produce soft toilet paper. In millions of households, a stack of cut newspaper squares sat in the bathroom. But you couldn't just use it stiff. The trick, passed down through generations, was to take the square of paper and rub it vigorously between your hands for 30 seconds. The friction broke down the stiff wood fibers of the paper, turning it soft, pliable, and cloth-like. You quite literally had to manufacture your own comfort by hand. Here is where things get uncomfortable. The modern home goods industry wants you to believe that running a house requires 50 different specialized chemical products in 50 different plastic bottles. The Soviet housewife proved that this is a lie. With almost no money and extreme restrictions on what could be bought, home cooks and cleaners developed a deep reliance on the chemistry of simple things. The tricks on this list were born from a supply chain that constantly failed. But look at what they accomplished. They produced a resilient, zero-waste generation that modern convenience culture could never build. Number 10. The tooth powder miracle. Before toothpaste came in tubes, it came as a dry, chalky powder in a small tin. Because it was a fine, gentle abrasive, it was the ultimate cleaning hack. Mixed with a few drops of ammonia, it polished tarnished silver and brass to a mirror shine. It was the duct tape of the Soviet cleaning cabinet. Number 9. The matchstick lipstick trick. Cosmetics were fiercely expensive and rarely available in the exact shade a woman wanted. When a tube of lipstick was worn down flat to the plastic base, it was not thrown away. There was still a half-inch of product hidden inside the mechanism. Women used the unlit end of a wooden matchstick to dig out every last remaining milligram of the wax. They would mix these colorful scraps in a small tin with cheap petroleum jelly, melting it slightly over the stove to create a brand new, custom-colored lip gloss. The refusal to waste a single drop was absolute. Number 8. The tea mushroom. Kombucha. Long before kombucha became a $5 health drink in hipster cafes, it was a strange, alien-looking disc floating in a 3-liter glass jar on every Soviet windowsill. They called it the tea mushroom. When real soda or juices were unavailable, families fed this symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast with leftover black tea and cheap sugar. A week later, it produced a fizzy, tangy, slightly sweet, and incredibly healthy probiotic drink. It cost literally nothing to maintain, and neighbors constantly gifted layers of their mushroom to each other in a massive nationwide network of fermentation. Number 7. Cleaning windows with a raw potato glass cleaner was a luxury, but potatoes were cheap. To clean a dirty mirror or a grimy window, a housewife would cut a raw potato in half and rub the wet, starchy flesh directly over the glass. The potato starch acted as a powerful solvent, breaking down grease and grime. After rubbing the glass with the potato, She wiped it completely dry with a crumpled newspaper. The ink from the newspaper polished the glass, and the starch left a microscopic film that prevented the window from fogging up during the winter. It was pure organic chemistry. Number 6. The sacred jar hoard. If you threw a glass jar in the trash in the Soviet Union, your grandmother might actually slap you. Every single glass jar, no matter the size, was washed with boiling water and hoarded in cabinets, under beds, and on balconies. They were sacred, because when the brief summer arrived, families went to their dacha country garden to grow cucumbers, tomatoes, and berries. Those hoarded jars were boiled, sterilized, and filled with pickles and preserves. Without that wall of filled jars, the winter diet would be nothing but potatoes and grain. The jar was the vessel of survival. Number 5. Garlic juice as superglue. When a small porcelain teacup chipped or a piece of glass cracked, you couldn't run to the hardware store for superglue. Instead, you took a fresh, sticky clove of raw garlic. Garlic juice is incredibly high in natural adhesive sugars. If you rubbed the raw garlic juice along the edge of the broken porcelain and pressed the pieces together firmly, the juice dried into a bond so strong that the cup could be used for years afterward. The smell faded, but the bond remained. Number 4. Flour and water paste, clay. When a family was assigned a new bleak concrete apartment, they wanted to put up wallpaper to make it feel human. Wallpaper paste was non-existent, so mothers made clay. Flour and water, whisked together in a pot over low heat until it thickened into a sticky, translucent glue. It cost pennies. You painted it onto the back of cheap paper and slapped it onto the concrete walls. Here is the terrifying part about clay. It worked too well. Anyone who has ever tried to renovate an old Soviet apartment knows that removing wallpaper glued with flour paste requires a chisel, boiling water, and an act of God. Number 3. Making a TV antenna from beer cans. When men wanted to catch a better television signal to watch hockey or intercept a broadcast from a neighboring region, the factory antennas were useless. Enter the beer can antenna. 2 empty imported tin beer cans were taped to the ends of a wooden coat hanger. A copper wire was screwed into the pull tabs of the cans and plugged into the back of the television set. It looked ridiculous, but the specific shape and metal composition of the cans acted as a perfect wideband receptor, boosting the signal miraculously. Number 2. The soap sliver collection. You never, ever threw away the tiny, paper-thin remnant of a bar of soap. When it got too small to hold, it went into a jar. When the jar was full, Soviet women had 2 tricks. Either they boiled the slivers in a tiny bit of water to melt them together into a brand new, Frankenstein-looking bar of soap, or they dropped the slivers into a small, coarse cloth bag, tying it shut. They used that soap-filled bag directly as a self-lathering scrubbing sponge for washing dirty work clothes. Wasting soap was considered a fundamental failure of household management. Notice the sheer refusal to be defeated by a broken system. When the state failed to provide, the people provided for themselves. They did not sit down and complain about what they lacked. They looked at a potato, a burned-out light bulb, and a pile of newspapers, and they built a life out of it. It required a level of genius and discipline that has almost entirely vanished from the modern home. Number 1. Pantyhose for literally everything. When a pair of nylon pantyhose finally got a run in them that couldn't be stitched, their life had just begun. Nylon is one of the strongest materials on Earth, and Soviet citizens exploited it ruthlessly. Ripped pantyhose were stretched over the end of a vacuum cleaner hose to catch lost jewelry or small screws without sucking them into the dust bag. They were used to filter homemade wine or strain cottage cheese. They were used as heavy-duty twine to tie up tomato plants in the garden. But the most legendary use? When the rubber fan belt snapped on a Soviet Lada car in the middle of a freezing highway, a man would take his wife's nylon pantyhose, tie it tightly around the engine pulleys, and drive 50 miles back home. It was the ultimate, undisputed symbol of Smekalka. It meant that whoever was standing there had managed, against all odds, to keep the machine running. These 20 tricks were not desperate tragedies. They were brilliant, deeply human answers to the question of how to run a life when the world gave you nothing to work with. Genius does not require expensive products. It requires necessity, attention, and the refusal to waste a single thing. Tell me in the comments, do you think modern society has become too wasteful? Did your parents or grandparents ever use any of these frugal tricks like darning socks over a light bulb or saving the soap slivers? Share those memories down below, because that knowledge belongs to all of us. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.